all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including RSS.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Scott Davis. This is an interesting story we're going to talk about. Scott Davis is a historian and journalist based out of Spokane, Washington. He got his degree in history from Gonzaga University, which I know well. That's where I got my law degree back in the day. Scott, you wrote The Last of the Old Breed. It's the oral history of the final Marines from World War II. Welcome to Veterans Radio.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Well, this is a really interesting format as well, and maybe some of this format comes out of the fact that you have a very popular YouTube channel called The Vietnam Experience, and I'll direct people to that as well. But that's a storytelling YouTube channel. And The Last of the Old Breed, an oral history of the final Marines from World War II, which is put out by St. Martin's Press in June of 2026, is kind of that same storytelling. Did one kind of lead to the other?
Yeah, I actually started off with interviewing World War II veterans. We were discussing a minute ago. I started interviewing World War II veterans in 2015. At the time, I saw that they were starting to fade away, and I was in school as well, and I was planning on becoming a history teacher. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to interview some of these guys and then bring the firsthand experiences into the classroom and kind of bring history to life? And I recognized as I was interviewing some of these guys that there were pieces of the World War II story that hadn't been shared before, particularly with the guys coming home and some of the struggles that they had. And I kept bumping into guys in the Pacific Theater, and the Marine Corps in the Pacific really captivated me. This is just one of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard. I mean, we took a group of young men from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic standings, different religions, and we sent them off into the Pacific to fight on little islands that nobody's ever heard of against an enemy that was fanatical, that would rather die than surrender. And these were spectacularly violent battles. And I write about just about all of them that the Marine Corps participated in this book. And that was kind of the genesis for the book. But get back to your question a little bit. I just want to let these guys tell their own story. And that's why I decided to do oral history. And I started, like I said, with these World War II guys. And then I realized that there was nobody really doing Vietnam. So I kind of transferred into doing Vietnam veterans as well. There are people that would interview Vietnam veterans, but it was more veteran focused. They would have Afghanistan veterans on as well, or it had like a much wider topic. And I wanted to just focus on Vietnam and let these guys tell their stories. So when I did this oral history book, I decided to do an oral history and just let the guys tell their own stories. And it's the same concept with my YouTube channel is put the guys up. There's no commentary. There's no and it's guys telling their stories.
Well, what's interesting in the book is because you do set it up, and there is some commentary as you walk through the chapters or the author's notes. It'll be Pearl Harbor, Samoan Midway, Guadalcanal, Australia, which everybody seemed to love, Saipan, Guam, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. You take their stories as they traveled around the Pacific, frame it in terms of that particular battle or island or duty station, and then have the guys tell their story in that piece of it. It's an interesting way to go about it. How did you settle on that versus here's a chapter on everything Tommy has to say?
Well, there's a book called The Only Plane in the Sky, and it was an oral history of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And this guy had used that style where it was a little bit shorter quotes. It was much different than like Studs Terkel's The Good War, which you do one person would get a full chapter. And to me, it kind of bogged down a little bit when you have just block quotes, a lot of text where somebody have to just dig through. So I like this style of shorter quotes, shorter stories, and it fit well with how the veterans told stories, because the youngest veteran in this book is 90 years old and the oldest is 103.
That's another amazing fact in this book is, and I like the way you do this. You give the guy's name, you give his age at the time. So I just opened up to page 139. All three guys are 98 years old, and then you'd say what Marine division they're in. So it puts in context some of their history, their memories, and then ties it to whatever that particular chapter's about. How many guys did you interview between these ages of, as you say, late 90s to early 100s?
Yeah, there's 130 in this book, and then I couldn't stop after I finished the book. I've interviewed another 20 of them, so I've talked to over 150 Marines that served in the Pacific or stateside were between 90 and I think there's one guy, I think he's 105 now. So it's incredible. And again, the style of the book, it lent to how they remembered their service too, because they remembered in what I'd call visionettes. You'd ask a question and it would pop up one story and they might talk for 30 seconds or somebody talk for 30 minutes. So it kind of lent to the style of the oral history, how they remembered their service.
And the phrase "the last of the old breed" is really kind of captivating too, because you get that sense as you read through these vignettes of each of the guys in different stories, different theaters. I mean, it was a totally different time. What sort of things did you take away from this as you put all 130 interviews together?
Yeah, it's hard to take one lesson. I'm sure I absorb more from these guys than I realized, and it'll probably be, decades before I fully can put into words maybe what I took from them. But these guys, I mean, the old breed, I think, is a perfect description of these. These guys grew up in what I call like the confluence of time. They grew up. A lot of the guys had 8th grade educations and they rode horses to school. And by the time they were passing away, these guys had iPhones. The things that they lived through with the war and how violent it was, and then the Cold War and the technological advancements, it boggles the mind. And talking to them, it was like you're talking to people out of the movies, out of books. It was just incredible. So it's hard to say exactly what I took from, but they every time I would talk to one, it was just like, wow, that was like reading a book. They're just incredible people.
Well, and some of these, because of the way it's short and captured, you can really maybe relate to Tom Shields, who's 93, goes, I was a damn good shot because I came from Kentucky and had a rifle since I was 7. I learned to shoot squirrels with that damn thing. When you only have one shot, you get pretty accurate. I mean, you can just see this guy, this old man from Kentucky, taking pride in the fact that he learned to shoot when he was 7 years old.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it really, to me, it's like you get a glimpse too that, these were old men when I'm talking to them, but once they were kids and when they fought, they were incredibly young. The Marine Corps specifically attracted young men. The average age was 20, and if you were 25 years old, they called you pops. The Marine Corps during World War II, it was a young man's business, and it always just blew me away by how young they were and what they did at those ages.
Well, and the diversity of where they came from really comes through with these guys who are still around. One of them, Luther Hendricks, who was 96 at the time you were talking to him, was African American, and talks about how we couldn't go into any of the restaurants unless we went in the back door, and it was, it brings home some of the problems of our time, right? Of that time of racial inequality. I think you really tried to capture, although you had to work with what you got, right? You really tried to capture sort of all kinds of different men who went into the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think sometimes in books, the people that get recorded are the people who present themselves in a certain way. They're the guys that are kind of leading the parade on Veterans Day, or they're articulate and really well spoken. They'll be on the radio shows or TV, and I think we neglect sometimes that there are some guys that went and they had low educations. They went and they fought and they were good Marines, and then they came home and may have worked whatever hard labor job, and they just didn't get the attention. I really wanted to capture. There were all kinds of guys that fought during World War II. Everybody fought in World War II. I mean, 16 million Americans, and the Marine Corps had 500,000 men. So there were all kinds of people, and it doesn't all mesh perfectly well with this greatest generation idea. There were guys who were bums. There were guys who were drunks. There were guys who were crooks, but there were also plenty of guys who perfectly fit that greatest generation idea. So I just wanted to capture that there's more to the story than maybe what we have been told. And there's just there's a much larger picture when it comes to World War II, just because how large the event was.
And maybe in part this is the men at this age in their late 90s can be more candid than they would have been when they were, macho 30-year-olds. And one of them that I related to was Don Pilcher, was 95 at the time. And he said, we went down to Oceanside, got on a ship. We were only out to sea about 30 minutes, and I got seasick. And I was seasick every time we went anywhere. That trip lasted about 9 or 10 days. It was excruciating. Would he have really admitted, I'm a Marine, part of the service, I'm sick the whole time we're on a darn ship in the Pacific? And yet that's reality, right? One of the things I liked about the stories you put together, the conversations you put together, there's a whole lot of honesty in there that maybe you wouldn't have gotten at another time.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct. I think these guys are at a point in their lives where they recognize that, if I don't tell the story now, I'm never going to. And if I want to tell the truth, now is the time. There was one guy, Les Anderson. He talked to me. He was 95 years old. It was the first time he'd ever talked about World War II, and he was very emotional about what he'd been through. He fought at Iwo Jima, and it was something that he felt he needed to get off his chest before he died. He ended up passing away a couple months after we did the interview. And I think it also helped too that I was a stranger coming into some of these guys, that they knew they were going to talk to me once and probably never see me again. And it lent to them maybe being a little bit more honest, that you could tell this guy something that you may not want to tell your daughter or your son. And that was what I asked all these guys, is if you just be honest with me. Yeah, like I said before, that sometimes you read some accounts and you go, was that really the way it was? That's pretty cookie cutter. And that's what I just asked these guys. Just be honest with me. Tell me the truth, and I'll recount it as you said. I just want you to be honest with me.
Yeah,
so
they didn't glamorize it. Some of these personal stories about buddies being shot or brothers being blown up, it's the hard truth without any glamour on it. They weren't trying to make a Hollywood statement, were they?
No, not at all. Not at all. Particularly, there's one interview that always stands out to me. W. Lee Robinson. I'm sure you read that passage in Iwo Jima. There was a guy named Lloyd Sargent, and that wasn't his rank. It was his last name was Sargent. But he told a horrific story about him getting hit by a piece of shrapnel across the guts, and he thought he had soiled his pants, and nobody had the heart to tell him that it was actually his guts that spilled out onto his pants, and that's what he was feeling. And the last words that he said were, tell my sister the lieutenant killed me, because they moved out beyond where they should have been, and they took some friendly fire. The shrapnel that killed him was actually shrapnel from a shell that came from an American tank. But there's nothing glamorous about that story, and really with the whole picture of combat in the Pacific during World War II, there was nothing pretty about what went on out there. And I think some people forget that. I think we watch movies and we read these stories and we see, these depictions of guys, grimacing and carrying machine guns. And some people get the idea that it was all glory and honor, but there was a lot of horror, and a lot of these guys were haunted till the day they died by what they saw and experienced.
Yeah, there's a quote by Ken Brown, 95 years old, 5th Marine Division, where he says, "I saw the worst horrors of the war. I saw the worst things the Japanese could do on Iwo Jima, and I saw the worst things the United States could do in dropping the bomb. Of course, I happen to be one of the people who was very grateful for the bomb. I wouldn't be here today. It would have been terrible if we had invaded." You can tell by his statement, this haunted him for his entire life, and I suspect that was true for many of the guys.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. And Ken just passed away here in January. He was 101 years old. But the horrors followed these guys home. And again, I've talked a few times now about pieces of the World War II story that we don't hear about. But a lot of these guys came home beset by their experiences. They were having nightmares, and they were having all these PTSD symptoms that we associate with Vietnam or the new war, Iraq and Afghanistan. But this was happening during World War II as well. These guys were not unaffected by what had happened to them. They carried those scars with them when they came home, and they carried them till the day they died. Some of these guys, 100, 101 years old, it just didn't go away.
I don't want to leave it with this as a totally depressing book. It's a totally realistic book, The Last of the Old Breed by Scott Davis from St. Martin's Press. Some of it's kind of humorous, and that has to do when they got an R&R, particularly stories coming out of Australia when they were there, or New Zealand. You want to tell any of those?
Yeah, well, I hope I don't give the impression that it is all doom and gloom. These guys had a tremendous sense of humor. Some of the funniest guys I ever met. And when they went to Australia and New Zealand, my God, they had the time of their lives there. They were drinking and getting in fights. And there's some stories that you couldn't be published in a book. It'd be kind of a more lurid stories. But they had a tremendous time of in Australia, because they'd come back. This is I'm talking about the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions. They'd come back from fighting on Guadalcanal and had been in the jungles and had malaria. So when they came back, it's like, oh, there's women here, there's beer, there's ice cream. We can just slip out of the hospital and jump on a train, and all of a sudden we're back in society. And I know there was one guy, he went on a riverboat cruise and ended up bruising his legs really bad because he had him pinned in the rail somehow but he was kissing this girl and he didn't want to stop kissing her. So he just kept his legs pinned in there and ended up with these terrible bruises on his legs. But there's all kinds of stories. These guys had a tremendous time.
It is funny to hear them tell, and a number of guys tell this story about how, we'd be at the hospital, but we'd sneak out, jump on this is Elwyn Hart, 93. We had to ride a train back and forth when we went on Liberty. We had a pretty good tent camp set up there. John Elby said, you get on a train and go down to Wellington, get off, go to a bar. It was like America. You can feel the R&R relief that these guys got in these kind of situations.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's kind of funny too, because I'd always thought of these tent camps as being pretty good places in comparison to where they'd been on Guadalcanal, and they certainly were. But there was one guy I interviewed, and I asked him about his time in New Zealand, and he sang this little jingle. He said, "Pai Kakariki, the land that God forgot," and it hit me that it's like, oh, these tent camps weren't necessarily houses of luxury. These guys wanted to go to Wellington or these big cities and sleep in hotels and take baths and, whatever. So it's like even these tent camps weren't that great of places, but they're pretty pleased to be just out of a combat zone, I guess. So,
and again, some of these statements are just so relatable. Where Clayton Naverson, 99 at the time, says, they were short on food, but they were glad to share whatever they had. He's talking about being in Australia. I learned to love mutton. I never had mutton in Minnesota. and then Wally Hamlin, a 99 at the time, says, they talk kind of funny. It was English, but it was really blubbery English. Now, you realize these guys all have their own accents. None of them think at all that they have an accent, but they're in Australia, and those folks are blubbery English. So there's humor in a lot of these little statements by the guys, and I think that helps lighten up the book, The Last of the Old Breed. I want to talk about one more thing that you did that I think is a great feature of this book that sometimes gets overlooked. In the end, in The Shadow of War, you come back and talk to the sons and daughters of a lot of these guys. Talk a little bit about how that came about and what you learned, not by necessarily the Marines, but the boys and girls that they came back home and created.
Yeah. Well, the idea for that is I'd actually seen this documentary. He Has Seen War, and it was made by the same people that produced the Pacific, the Pacific miniseries and Band of Brothers. And in that documentary, they talk about the guys coming home after World War II, and they talked to a number of the kids of the veterans, and they had some pretty compelling stories. And it got me thinking, well, I wonder what the kids of the guys I've interviewed have to say about their experiences, because having somebody come home with such incredible experiences that had to have affected the way they grew up or had to have influenced them in some way. And I started talking to them, and they started telling these incredible stories about how they came to realize that their parents had been through this worldwide cataclysmic event. There was one guy that found gold teeth, Japanese teeth that had gold in it, in his dad's stuff. He actually took it into school for show and tell because he didn't know what they were. And of course, his mother got a call, and he got a not a very warm welcome when he came back home. But it's really incredible how they influenced the generation that followed them, and how that generation found out about what their parents did through. A lot of the time, it was through finding photo albums and flags and swords, not so much through hearing the stories firsthand, because some of these guys have been notoriously silent about their service. But it had a tremendous impact on the generation that followed.
And it's interesting because the sons and daughters a lot of them talk about how dad was patriotic or more patriotic at the end, but others who said, dad opposed, while he fought in World War II, he opposed Korea, he opposed Vietnam. He really felt, this is Sandra Williamson, daughter of Marvin Strombo, he felt it was wrong and shouldn't be happening. It really bothered him because he had fought for everybody's right to speak, including his own. Some really deep messages come out of these interviews, don't they?
Yep. Yeah, 100%. It was really affecting for me to hear some of these and hear a lot of the talk too is about legacy. That's a big thing that kept coming up with them that this legacy, this generation, that the freedoms that they fought for, they wanted to see that carried on. They were concerned that we're losing a little bit of what those people fought for. That was a theme that continued to come up over and over in these conversations.
As you set out on this journey, almost, 10 years plus now. Did you know this is where you were going to end, or is this sort of surprising to you as you put together and get ready for publication The Last of the Old Breed?
It's been a surprise every step along the way. And again, you just don't know how people are going to receive the information. Are people going to want to hear some of the uglier parts of World War II? So I've been surprised so far with how positive the reactions have been. I'm looking forward to seeing where we're headed to, what the future is going to hold. So we'll see.
Well, we really appreciate the time today that Scott Davis has given to Veterans Radio as a historian and journalist out of Spokane, Washington. As I mentioned at the outset, he has a very popular YouTube channel called The Vietnam Experience. Is there anywhere else that we should direct folks who want to know more about Scott Davis or more about the work that you're doing or have done?
No, I think I'd really appreciate it if anybody would purchase the book and take the time to read it. I made a promise to these guys that I would make sure people don't forget what they sacrificed, and this book is a step towards that. And again, if people out there are interested in the Vietnam War, I have a YouTube channel called The Vietnam Experience, and go and subscribe to that. And again, that's just veterans telling their stories. I make no commentary on it. I don't censor them. I just want them to have an opportunity to voice their experiences and tell people what they saw and how they view things. So those two are my big outlets right now, and I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about those two things.
Well, we really enjoyed the book and going through the YouTube channel, Scott Davis, The Last of the Old Breed. Thanks for spending some time today with Veterans Radio.
Wonderful. Appreciate the opportunity.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows
by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's Chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.